My name is Michael. I'm 52 years old, and I just shredded 18 years of my life in a paper shredder. I'm not looking for sympathy. I want you to understand what it feels like when the ground beneath your feet disappears and you realize that your own children don't carry a single drop of your blood. 3 days ago, standing in front of the dining table, I looked my wife in the eyes and handed her a yellow envelope. She thought they were tickets for an anniversary trip. They weren't. They were DNA test results confirming that the twins I raised, the ones I worked double shifts for and sacrificed my best years for, are the result of a betrayal that started before she ever said "I do" at the altar. My life was a setup, a staged performance where I was the only one who didn't know the script. She turned pale, her hands shaking, and the silence in that room became so heavy it felt like you could touch it. There were no screams, no dramatic breakdown from me. Just one cold certainty. The woman I shared my bed with was a stranger, and my family was a perfectly designed lie. Now she thinks she can ask for forgiveness, but she has no idea I've already made the first move on a board where she will lose absolutely everything. If you like stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave your like and subscribe. Here, we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. To understand how I ended up with that yellow envelope, you first need to understand who I used to be. For nearly 2 decades, I considered myself the luckiest man in the world. I don't say that with arrogance, but with that foolish peace of someone who believes their life is completely figured out. I met Emily when I was 34 years old. She was young, radiant, with that look that makes you feel like you're the center of her universe. We got married quickly, maybe too quickly, but at the time, love doesn't let you see the seams of reality. She said she wanted a family, that her biggest dream was to be a mother and build a solid home. I, a man fully devoted to my logistics company, saw in her the safe harbor I needed after years of doing nothing but working and building capital. Just a few months after we got married, the news came. She was pregnant with twins. I remember that day with a clarity that now burns inside me. We went to the doctor, heard the 2 heartbeats, and I felt a responsibility that changed my very skin. From that second on, my life stopped being mine. Everything I did, every contract I signed, every extra hour I spent at the office, it was all for them, for Ethan and for Sophia. When they were born, my world came to a halt. They were small, fragile, and I swore to protect them from everything. Emily cried tears of joy, or at least that's what I believed. Now, when I close my eyes and remember her face in that hospital, I don't see emotion. I see relief. The relief of a woman who had just secured her future at the cost of my ignorance. The years passed like a sigh of fabricated normality. My routine was predictable, solid. I woke up at 5 in the morning, made coffee in silence so I wouldn't wake anyone, and went out to fight the world so they would never lack anything. I paid for the best schools, music lessons, summer trips. My relationship with Emily seemed, on the surface, perfect. We didn't have major fights. She was the devoted wife, the one who managed the house and handled every detail. I was the provider, the pillar. Often my friends told me they envied my life. They said how lucky I was to have found such a loyal woman, so focused on her home. I would just nod, feeling proud of my good fortune. My children grew up. Ethan became a tall, quiet teenager with a bone structure that looked nothing like mine or my father's. Sophia had those light, almost translucent eyes that I couldn't find in any family album, neither mine nor Emily's. But I never suspected anything. Why would I? Love is blind, but trust is deaf. If anyone had suggested they weren't mine, I probably would have punched them in the face. I took them to soccer, to dance practice, taught them how to drive. I saw myself reflected in their gestures, in their laughter, even though physically genetics was screaming the truth right in my face. I chose not to listen. Emily was always careful. She never left her phone out in the open, never came home late without a logical explanation, never gave me a reason to doubt. She was a professional at deception. Her role as a devoted wife was her best shield. I would look at her at night while she read in bed and think I would die for her. I felt indebted to life for giving me that stability. My emotional state was that of a satisfied man, a man who believed he had won the game of life. I had a healthy bank account, a dream house, and a family that was the envy of the neighborhood. Still, there were small cracks I chose to ignore. Old photos she preferred not to show, phone calls she took in the garden with a tone of voice that changed the moment I appeared. Tiny details my brain registered, but my heart immediately dismissed. She maintained the balance with surgical precision. She made me feel like the man of the house while she pulled the strings behind the scenes. The atmosphere in our home was one of absolute calm, a calm I now know was the eye of the storm. I owned everything, yet I possessed nothing. Everything I had built on the rock of loyalty was, in reality, suspended over a swamp of lies that were about to surface. My mistake was believing that time erases sins. Time erases nothing. It only gives them space to grow until the consequences become too large to hide. I was a 52-year-old man, happy, stable, and completely deceived. I was at the peak of my life, not knowing the cliff was just one step away, and that the person who would push me was the same one who had sworn eternal love to me at the altar. The crack opened in the most banal way possible, a routine health test that ended up in a genetics lab. Ethan needed a minor surgery, nothing serious, but the surgeon requested detailed blood typing. When the results came in, the numbers didn't add up. I am O negative. Emily is too. Ethan is AB positive. I'm not a doctor, but I know enough about logistics and basic logic to understand that this is biologically impossible. In that moment, the air in the doctor's office became dense. I looked at the paper, then looked at Emily. She didn't flinch. She had the cold blood to say it must be a lab error, that those things happen all the time. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes shifted for a millisecond toward the window. That millisecond was my death sentence. I didn't say another word that day. We drove back home in a funeral-like silence. She turned on music in the car, hummed along to a song as if nothing had happened. I felt a knot in my throat that made it impossible to swallow. That night, while she slept deeply beside me, I lay there staring at the ceiling. My body felt like it weighed a ton. The next day, without telling anyone, I collected hair samples from the twins' brushes and took a private DNA test, one of those that promises absolute discretion. The 5 days it took to get the results were the longest of my 52 years. I kept going to work, kept having dinner with them, kept kissing them goodnight. But inside, the man I used to be was falling apart. When I received the email with the PDF file, my hands were sweating. I opened it in my office, the door locked. Probability of paternity, 0%. For both, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't confusion, it was a conscious decision that had lasted 18 years. I closed the computer, leaned back in my leather chair, and stared at the wall for hours. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. My anger wasn't a fire. It was a block of ice spreading through my veins. My entire life flashed before me like a horror movie. The birthdays, the graduations, the financial sacrifices, the sleepless nights taking care of them when they were sick. It was all a lie. I had been the ATM of a fantasy she shared with someone else. That same afternoon, I hired a private investigator. I didn't just want the truth. I wanted evidence to destroy her. In less than a week, the investigator handed me a file. Emily had maintained an on-and-off relationship with a college ex-boyfriend during the first 2 years of our marriage. The man, a guy with no direction and nothing to offer, had moved away shortly after the kids were born, but she had always known who the father was. She chose me not out of love, but out of convenience. I was the man with the bright future, the one who could give them a life of luxury. The other was just the result of a goodbye night that went too far. The humiliation of knowing she looked me in the eyes every single day, fully aware that I was raising another man's children, was unbearable. I felt small, stupid, a clown in my own home. But the worst part came when the investigator showed me recent photos. She was still in contact with him. They exchanged emails. He knew about the kids but never wanted responsibility. She kept him updated on their achievements, their trips, the trips I paid for. My money, my effort, my sweat was feeding the ego of a man who had never lifted a finger for them. The climax of that humiliation came one Sunday night. We were in the living room, the twins talking about their plans for college. Ethan wanted to study medicine. Sophia wanted to go to Europe to study art. Thousands of dollars in tuition I had already set aside. Emily smiled at me and placed her hand on my shoulder, saying, "You're such a good father, Michael. I don't know what we would do without you." Those words, which once filled me with pride, now made me nauseous. I felt physical disgust. I stood up abruptly, made up an excuse about a severe migraine, and locked myself in my office. That was my symbolic expulsion. I no longer belonged to that family. That house, which I had paid for penny by penny, felt like a foreign prison. The kids, whom I deeply loved, now reminded me every second of their mother's betrayal. I realized that if I spoke at that moment, she would cry, beg for forgiveness. The kids would take her side, and I would end up being the villain who destroyed the family over a mistake from the past. No, I was not going to be the victim. If she had given me 18 years of lies, I would give her a lesson that would last the rest of her life. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and didn't see the devoted husband anymore. I saw a man who had just died, and another who was being born with a single purpose: cold, surgical justice. That night, the Michael they knew died. The man who woke up the next day was a stranger, an executor who felt nothing but the need for balance. My first step was to visit an old college contact, a lawyer specializing in family law and financial fraud named Daniel Carter. I didn't go to his fancy office. We met in a dim cafe, far from familiar eyes. When I handed him the DNA results and the investigator's report, Daniel took off his glasses and sighed. He told me that legally, after 18 years, I still had obligations, but morally, she had handed me the weapon to destroy her. My plan wasn't just divorce. Divorce would be a gift she would gladly accept if she walked away with half of my assets. My goal was the total demolition of her financial and social security. Over the next 3 months, I became the best actor in the world. I kept kissing her when I got home, kept paying the bills, kept listening to her plans for summer vacations. But under the table, I was moving every single dollar. I discovered that Emily had a secret account where she saved money for emergencies, funded by the surplus I gave her for household expenses. It was a considerable amount. With Daniel's help, we began tracking every financial movement within our marital assets. We found that a large portion of our properties was under a corporation that I mostly controlled. I started liquidating assets legally but discreetly, reinvesting the capital into trusts beyond her reach, under clauses she wouldn't be able to challenge. I wasn't stealing. I was taking back what had been taken from me under false pretenses. Patience became my greatest ally. Every time I felt the urge to scream her betrayal in her face, I reminded myself that anger is a luxury for losers. Coldness is the weapon of those who win. One key strategic detail was the twins' age. They were about to turn 18. The moment they crossed that line, many legal protections tied to minors would shift in my favor when it came to financial obligations under deception. I waited for the day of their high school graduation. Meanwhile, I kept investigating the biological father. His name was Samuel. He lived in a small town, working in a mechanic shop, constantly on the verge of bankruptcy. I got his address and phone number. I didn't call him. I saved it as the final piece of my puzzle. I wanted Emily to know that I knew who he was, but I wouldn't reveal it until it was too late for her to prepare a defense. My ally, the investigator, managed to intercept emails where Emily told Samuel that the kids would soon be in college and that she would finally have the freedom to see him more often. Reading that was confirmation that she had never intended to stop her betrayal. She was simply waiting for me to finish paying for the upbringing of her children so she could discard me. My emotional reconstruction required accepting that the twins, even though I loved them, were a living reminder of my humiliation. I had to distance myself emotionally from them, treat them with mechanical politeness, preparing for the day I would tell them the truth. It wasn't easy. Watching them laugh at the dinner table made my stomach turn, but justice requires sacrifice. Daniel prepared the documents for an annulment based on fraud, along with a civil lawsuit for emotional damages and reimbursement of child-rearing expenses based on premeditated deception. It was a difficult case, but with proof of her ongoing relationship with Samuel and evidence that she hid the truth about paternity, we had a golden opportunity to leave her with nothing. I made sure all our mutual friends, people from the club, and our business partners received an invitation to a surprise anniversary party I was organizing. Emily was thrilled. She thought she was finally going to get the diamond she had been hinting at for years. I sat in my office at night, alone, watching the documents pile up. The brilliance of my plan was in the timing of the impact. I wouldn't give her time to react. There would be no friendly mediation. It would be a public execution of her reputation and stability. I became an expert in silence. I learned to observe her gestures, the way she faked affection, and I began to feel a cold pity for her. She believed she was the smartest person in the room, that she had me wrapped around her finger while she planned her future with another man using my money. She had no idea that the man sleeping beside her was now her worst nightmare, waiting for the exact second to pull the trigger of truth. Revenge, when it's rational, is an art form, and I was about to sign my masterpiece. The day of the supposed anniversary party arrived. The atmosphere was filled with that artificial joy only money can buy. I rented a private venue, invited our closest friends, my business partners, and of course the twins, who had turned 18 just a week earlier. Emily looked radiant, dressed in an expensive outfit I personally told her to buy. She walked among the guests like the queen of a life that was about to collapse. I stood in a corner, a glass of wine in hand, watching her every move with a calm that even my lawyer, present among the crowd, found unsettling. Around 10 at night, I asked for silence. I stepped onto the small stage, tested the microphone, and watched as every eye turned toward me. Emily walked over, standing beside me with that rehearsed smile of the perfect wife. I began by thanking everyone for being there, spoke about the 18 years of marriage, and how family is the foundation of everything. She looked at me with fake admiration, waiting for the announcement of a trip or a piece of jewelry. But my tone changed. My voice became monotone, stripped of any trace of affection. I said that after nearly 2 decades, I had discovered that my wife was an exceptionally generous woman, so generous, in fact, that she decided to share her life and her children with another man without ever telling me. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. I pulled the yellow envelope out of my jacket pocket. I didn't hand her a diamond. I handed her the DNA results, printed in large format. She tried to snatch them from me, but I stepped back firmly. I began handing out copies to the closest guests. "Here you can see," I said with surgical coldness, "that Ethan and Sophia have no genetic relation to me. And here," I pulled out another folder with the investigators' photos, "you can see Samuel, the man Emily has been planning her future with while I was paying the bills." Emily's face went from pink to ash white in seconds. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Her eyes desperately searched for an escape, for a lie that could save her, but there was none. The twins were standing in the front row, frozen. Ethan stared at the paper with pure horror. Sophia began to cry silently. I felt no pity. I felt a cold release. I leaned in close to Emily's ear and whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Your suitcase is at the entrance of the hall. The locks on the house have already been changed. Your personal accounts are frozen by court order due to marital fraud. Today, you stop being my wife and become a stranger who owes me 18 years of deception." She tried to scream, tried to lunge at me, calling me a monster, but Daniel, my lawyer, immediately stepped in and handed her the official lawsuit notice. It was a pathetic scene. The woman who believed she was the architect of a perfect deception stood there, collapsing in front of the very people whose opinion mattered most to her. Her friends, the ones who admired her so much, stepped away as if she were contagious. No one defended her. No one came close to comfort her. The humiliation was total, public, and final. I stepped down from the stage without looking back. I walked toward the exit while she screamed my name in a room that had suddenly emptied of support. Ethan tried to stop me in the lobby. "Dad, please," he said, his voice broken. I stopped and looked him in the eyes. It was the hardest moment of the night. "I'm not your father, Ethan. I'm the man who raised you under a lie. Legally, I no longer have obligations to you. If you want answers, ask your mother and Samuel for the money." His words hung in the air as I walked out into the street, breathing for the first time in months, air that didn't stink of betrayal. That night she slept in a cheap hotel paid for with the little cash she had in her purse. I went back to my house, poured myself a whiskey, and enjoyed the silence. I had exposed her truth, protected my assets, and made it clear that I am not someone to be played with. The impact of my revenge wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about ripping away the mask of respectability she loved so much. The scandal spread like wildfire in our circle. In less than 24 hours, Emily went from being a respected socialite to the woman who deceived her husband with another man's twins for 18 years. The irony was delicious. She wanted freedom to be with her lover, and now she had it, but in absolute misery and loneliness. The debt of nearly 2 decades was collected in a single night, with interest she will never be able to repay. 6 months have passed since that night. The annulment process is moving forward with the precision of a Swiss watch. Emily tried to countersue, but her arguments fell apart against the evidence of her own betrayal. Today she lives in a small apartment, far from the luxuries she once flaunted, and works in an administrative job that barely covers her basic expenses. The lover, Samuel, disappeared the moment he realized there was no fortune to share. The love Emily claimed to feel for him didn't survive the absence of my bank account. With the twins, the distance is absolute. Many judged me, said they weren't to blame. Maybe they're right, but neither am I. Every time I saw them, I saw the face of the woman who used me as a financial tool for 18 years. I left them an educational fund, enough for them to finish their studies, not out of affection, but out of one last trace of honor. After that, their names will be out of my life forever. Today, my house is silent, but it's a clean silence. I've regained control of my future. Sometimes people ask me if I don't feel lonely starting over at 52. I answer that I prefer real loneliness over company built on lies. I feel no remorse. Forgiveness is for those who make mistakes, not for those who design an entire life based on deception. I've learned that true justice is simply giving each person the place they earned through their actions. She earned contempt. I earned the freedom of never being anyone's fool again. I look out the window and understand that there are no happy endings in stories like this, only necessary endings. Emily's balance sheet finally turned red. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave your like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.